America was founded on one basic principle. Treat your neighbor as yourself. Love the guy next to you and give him equal ground to talk to you. Care about him as you would yourself, your family, We did that because we were being treated unwell at the time by people across the sea who were part of our own country at the time. So we fought back against not having that equal representation, that equal footing to talk. Later, we fought against each other as we saw we were treating each other improperly. We have fought many wars where people were treating each other improperly. And here's what happens is that internally in this country, we have become those very people that we fought against for so long. We've become the people not responsive to our neighbor, caring for them as we would ourselves. Instead of creating a sense that we would lift up our neighbor and treat them as we would want to be treated. Today, what happens more often than not is that we justify the lying, the deception. We justify needing to license everything from fishing, from businesses to protesting spots. We license literally everything in this country at this point. And we've done so out of fear that we need to control. And it was the very thing not so long ago that we fought a world war against, needing to license everything, to have that much control. And we were so prosperous around that time that it was estimated that American prosperity would get to the point, American prosperity and efficiency would get to the point that an average man would only have to work 4 hours a week. And today we are totally the opposite. And we're totally the opposite because we've stopped caring for our neighbor as ourselves. We've stopped empathizing with the fact that the guy at the top of a large company is overwhelmed in time, whereas because of improper not willing to care about that the guy may be protecting families within a company, and he may be protecting shareholders of that company, and he may be doing everything he can to do all that, instead of honoring that and seeking a proper reconciliation with whatever may be improper in regards to a billing of a business or whatever the case may be. What happens is that guy often gets attacked. He gets attacked the most. Now the reality is that without innovators, there's no prospering. Now, what this happens dynamically, whether it's companies, whether it's governments, or whether it's families. If you stick to it in just the dynamic in a family, when there is a tragedy in the family, say for instance, the loss of a child. There's a loss of a child in the family. The family, and an extended family would normally want to come around to support that person or support the family that the things are going on. But what happens dynamically is if somebody feels something's improper that's going on, some decision that the family may make, they may collude with other family members to seek to control the family's decisions or seek to say why they feel they're justified or not. They may, they may bargain, like getting something they want for support, and all those things. When we were talking about our neighbors overseas, were improper. That's why we fought a war. We fought a war so we could have equal footing with our neighbor on that. And in this family dynamic, what happens is that often through fear, the one party may be oppressive in trying to force the decisions of another party in that family for fear of what may be going on. But that may not be the case of what's happening. So what happens is that whenever we react in fear, we often cause the very distress that we believe is going on. So when somebody's already pressed for, some tragedy is happening in the family, and you make more external pressure come onto that person, rather than come and relieve pressure, you've actually created further liability that person has to deal with that taxes them more rather than be an asset. Now, if you're a head of a large company, you understand this really well because you don't have the time to deal with a bunch of people who are creating further liabilities for you. And it can be very taxing to have to reply to comments or criticisms from everybody. And so you have to focus on what's productive, and you have to focus on who's being an asset. Now, at the same time, the little guys out there, there's a lot of little guys who may be doing the same improper situation rather than understanding and empathizing with the leadership of a large company like Facebook, coming in front of a committee to try to understand if they're doing something improper. Where Facebook, they've got thousands of employees and families, they've got shareholders, the guy's got to care about that any mistaken answer he gives causes damage to them all. And he's one man at the top. And, maybe he's got an employee or group of employees doing things improper. But when you get the guy on the line and say that his word at the end of the day, he needs to explain why a certain employee, maybe he's handling it internally. Maybe the employee got a warning. Maybe the employee got fired. Who knows? But if you're asking him to, do it for the court of public opinion, it's not just him on the line. It's his employees. It's his shareholders. There's a lot of people beyond him. And he's one man who's only got 24 hours in the day, just like everybody else. At the same time, when big companies are so fearful of little guys because employees are semi being lazy or their systems are set up maliciously. I remember, working through issues with certain companies where their documents, their contracts with me for a service I did locally here were done improper. And, I didn't feel the need to take them to court at the time. I understood that maybe they didn't know. And maybe the little guys who were pressing it didn't know. And why should the shareholders, why should the company, why should the executives, be taken out or have further problem for what was likely either a mistake, a laziness, or maybe the guy who did the contract, maybe he had a newborn baby at the time. Who knows? There's not, at the end of the day, it's not really an excuse, but sometimes there's a legitimate excuse. Sometimes things are legitimate. Sometimes you just don't know. And the reality is that if you're so afraid to do things that you're not willing to try when you don't know how to do things, well, then you never become a star football player, because you can't be a star football player without learning and starting from the beginning and training yourself and building yourself up over time with things you started out not knowing how to do. So when we clobber people inappropriately and not treat our neighbors as ourselves, not give equal footing, but that we demand, in a sense, this is why I empathize with Trump not wanting to go into a testimony, and because what happens is that in the media right now, things are taken apart and retroactively decided upon that, this is what I mean. And rather than looking at the whole thing in context of what's said and verifying any facts. And so what happens is you get into discussions with whether it's a bill for a service locally where there's not a willingness to empathize that, or even with customer service, tech support on a computer line. There's not a willingness to empathize on the other side that the guy doing the tech support, he's had a long day, he's dealt with stuff too. And the person asking for the tech support has likely done that too. But on the other side, that person, they're a whole person. He or she on the other end of that line, and the tech support is a whole person. And you're a whole person. And you're not just talking to some, a digitalized, entity or somebody that knows every legal aspect. They're going to make mistakes. And some of those mistakes are going to be legitimate. And some of them they're going to be because they're lazy and inappropriate, or because they're incentivized the wrong way. They're incentivized to do the call time versus how many solutions did you solve? How many good ratings did you get? And so when you're incentivized to drop the call, you're more incentivized to pass the buck to the next person to solve the solution. So nobody's really incentivized to solve solutions, to create solutions. And so if you're making things improper, you're not giving people a reason to empathize with each other, to understand that a lot of times that tech support person that you're having trouble with is likely going to be the same reason that you have trouble with a legal person. People like things the way they like it. They want to understand it. But the reality is today, Kansas City is talking to New York, who's talking to London, who's talking to Japan, and everybody has to come to an agreement on terms and terminology during the culture. Not everybody speaks the same. Not everybody does. So you get online people outraged as people read text improperly because somebody in Tennessee is talking to somebody in California and doesn't understand it's just an entirely different culture. When you get off the plane, you understand that. You take a breath because you're physically there. But just like oh so long ago, when we were divided against England, England wasn't here on the ground with us. They had to take a long boat ride to get on the ground. And so that separation does two things for people. You can either have a separation in patience or separation in fear. When you have a separation in patience, you don't immediately think ill of people just because you're separated. You understand you don't really know them very well. You may have not known them or seen them in a long time. You may not have a full understanding of it. It may take a long time to grasp that. Especially if you move to different areas. I have friends. I grew up in California. I'm in Chicago now. It's going into the different culture dynamics is very different experience. You know, California is an entirely different culture than Chicago, and how you speak to somebody, it's very different. So understanding that, you know, when you make it to the point that you have to have a license for everything, and you know, nobody's willing to care, help their fellow man, lift them up. When people aren't willing to just care for their neighbors themselves, they want to justify ignoring the person who's causing a stir, rather than listen to them. Is that what happens? Is that, you know, dynamically as a country, we tear ourselves down. We tear ourselves down in the same legalese that everybody else does, because there's no understanding at the end of the day that we're human beings. We're not capable of recollecting things so far back clearly for the most part. Every memory study you're ever going to do or has ever been done has never proven that any human has a 100% perfect accurate memory. There are people that do have greater memories. There are people that do have an ability to see more, remember things in more detail. There are people that have certain memories that are very, very cool. But what happens in a day and age like today is that more often than not, that person's going to get suppressed rather than lifted up, because we've looked at society as that everybody's got to fit the same standard. Whether you're talking about school, everybody's got to be taught the same. They all have no child left behind. Everybody's got to be on equal ground. There's no dynamic for people to be different. If people are different, they're mental health. If people aren't, you know, fitting X, Y, Z, well, I can justify not talking to them or following through with them because of X, Y, Z. There's no room for empathy. And you can't get very far in life without empathy, because you overwhelm everybody around you. And the thing is that what you need to do is come in and you need to love them. You need to listen, empathize, understand. You know, the quickest way to build trust with people is to tell them something practical, to forgive them about something that they knew was consequential. You know, I think at the time that what was going on in America, had England at the time of the you know, was our separation from them, had they at the time recognized they're wrong, they would, we could have come together. We'd have still been an entire, it'd be an entirely different story today. But when you press people and leverage them inappropriately, whatever the case is, you ask them to do something in good faith, but then you don't, you know, keep that same kind of integrity, you know, but you know, it becomes a double bind. And it's honestly, it's just madness. When you have a family member that needs help, and it's obvious that they need help, and you, instead of helping them and being an asset, instead become a further liability that they have to deal with more. You know, it's absolute madness. Because on the same token, if you were in a tough spot, you would request that they be kind to you. You would request that love. You would desire it. And that's where this country is failing. And it will continue to fail the longer that we do not desire to treat our neighbor as ourselves. Whether that's the CEO, whether it's, your physical neighbor, whether it's, mom or dad, or distant cousin, or whether it's a church member, or somebody in an opposing company or whatnot. The moment you don't realize that the reason there's so much fraud that's prevalent today, and the reason it's so hard to do vetting or due diligence, or the reason why you have to have so much security and so many different things, is because of the nail biting. It's because of the snapping. Well, you have to be a certain way that I don't have to be. And I can demand it from you, and you can't demand it from me. You can't ask for the same from me because of XYZ reasons. I have to hold you to account, but you can't hold me to account. And all that leads to is self-destruction. That's all it leads to. It's just self-destruction of our own country, of our neighbors, which none of us want. None of us want. You want to take apart anything, you take it apart internally. And we have become the same thing that we fought desperately so many years ago. And the regulation and everything is what's killing us. And we have to take up so much extra time and work and effort to cut through all these sensitivities where people feel they need to control. And some of it's common sense, to be honest. Coffee is hot. I remember that was the funniest thing I think everybody had in chain email, where at one point there was a case in England where coffee was hot at McDonald's, and it got spilt on something. Well, coffee's hot. We like our coffee hot. I think to myself, well, yeah, the coffee was hot, but in the essence where it spilt on the person, it was too hot. It was way too hot. And it caused, I believe, if I remember right, it caused like 2nd or 3rd degree burns. And that was the problem. It wasn't that the coffee spilled. It was how hot the coffee was. And so dynamically, if you don't take apart the truth and empathize with your neighbor, it becomes a great problem. And we pray that people want to do it. But in this day and age, we don't. We look to the media and we want them to be benevolent in telling us the truth. But I've never sat next to somebody in any section of any who knows something that's practically going on the ground, who doesn't say when they're watching certain news channels that, oh my gosh, they're leveraging that improperly. And I go to myself, well, practically, they're being told a story and they got to report something, but maybe they're reporting the thing, maybe they're being lied to. And so what do you do in a country where people don't trust each other enough to show love and empathy in regards to what people can and can't know, but they then at the same time have to retroactively hold certain people to the fire because they're really underneath it all being a bully, because they're not caring for each other like they want to care for you. So if I could ask you to take anything from this rant, it would be, have some common sense. Look to people's consistent character over time. And if you're asking somebody to be a certain way for you, but you're not willing to do so for them, stop. You're creating a madness in your own life and you're tearing yourself down. So treat others as you want to be treated. If you want to be supported, support them. If you want to be, if you want to be lifted up, if you want to be believed, if you want to be followed through, do it. But don't do it to the point where if they're not going to ask for this, if you ask for the same thing from them and they wouldn't do it, don't. Call it out. Let them know. Do so appropriately. Cut the nonsense of the rest of the stuff, because, men are just as capable as lying as women are to get what they want. They're just as capable as making distractions. We're just as capable, and women are just as capable. So should every story be believed? Maybe, maybe not. Should, but can we call a spade a spade? And when you're asking, Kavanaugh to explain a story that happened, some years ago, that you're saying she has to be believed, but why can't he be believed? What's the justification for not believing him? That's the real question you got to ask. If you want to treat her like she's got to be believed, well, you got to treat him the same way. Otherwise, there's not an equal footing. And if there's not an equal footing, that's not really equal rights. That's the problem. That's the problem in America right now, is that we don't treat the little guy the same as the big guy. And we don't empathize that, who knows what really happened. And I really pray, just as Kavanaugh or anybody else would, that if something truly happened to what's happened, that she get help and that whoever it is come to justice. But if we're going to say that we can't believe Kavanaugh, we have to go through so many different investigations to keep, it's incredible. It's incredible, because in the same situation, this reminds me of how, if we keep going through all these appointments, this is 2018, we're almost the second year. If we keep going through these appointments this slow, all you're going to see, the Democrats, all they're going to see coming back from the Republicans later on is the same thing. And you're going to go, what the heck? Now, here's the thing. The Democrats will retroactively maybe say, well, the Republicans, if they really want us to treat us as they want to be treated, well, then they'll just confirm everybody. Well, it's like we did that before. We did that with Obama. We confirmed everybody like we were supposed to at the right time. And then you go around flip-flopping it like we don't have to behave. You don't have to behave like we do, but we have to suddenly go back to behaving the same way? Because, come on, people. And be common sense. Look, if you have a problem with a company, go talk it out with the company. If the company is being improper, you got to have some sort of attorney. But here's the thing: if an attorney thinks can't be on equal ground, how do you speak up? Likely the CEO doesn't need to be taken out because some customer service agent had a bad day, and you're unwilling to compromise them. But at the same time, if you appeal to higher people in the company appropriately, and you appeal to different branches and ask, what the heck, how do we do this and make it appropriate, speed things up? How does the little guy speak out when 70% of us, 70+% of us, we're paycheck to paycheck? We don't have enough time. We're the same position as the CEO. We don't have the time. We're fighting bills and everything else. We don't have that 4-hour thing that we thought we would have. And it's because we've regulated ourselves to death that everybody has to argue. And, legalese is, what is it, the 90s? I remember it's a famous line in a Hulk Hogan movie in the 90s where he came out for space. I'm trying to remember. I don't really remember the movie, but, Hulk Hogan comes up to the guy, it's big and strong. The guy says, you hit my bike or my car, whatever it is. You know what I'm going to do to you? You know what I'm going to do? And Hulk Hogan beefs up. He goes, yeah, you're gonna beat me up? He goes, yeah, what are you talking about? It's the 90s. I'm gonna sue you. It's just that kind of nonsense. It's that kind of nonsense, and it's just nuts. It's where you have one party who's talking about, how we degrade women or whatnot, and then or how certain problems. It's like, but look at what you're doing. There's this double bind within your own party where you're saying women have to have the right to this, but we also have to stand up for these people who don't believe in that same thing. And it's like, it's mind-boggling. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? And the only way to deal with it is say the other party's the same way, and that's not a justification for your own party having a double bind within itself. That's not. Anyway, I'm done.